Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 important articles. There are 4 detailed columns that are very important for the mains exam, and we also have several prelims related points and facts that we can take away from these articles. And we also have 2 small topics which are more important for the prelims examination. So let's cover all these articles comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a couple of very important announcements. If you're looking to enroll for our IAS courses, then this would be the perfect opportunity, as Unacademy is providing a 60% discount on all our subscriptions. I'm told that this offer will end tomorrow and you will get the subscription at just 19,999 along with double validity. What is double validity? Now let's say you take a 6-month subscription. You will get a 6-month subscription free. Similarly, if you take 9, 12, 18-month subscription, you will get 9, 12, and 18 months of free extension from our side. And you also get access to CSE Assure if you take up a subscription of more than 18 months. Under CSE Assure, let's say for some reason you will not clear the exam in your first attempt, then your next attempt is entirely on us. So those interested to enroll, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description. And to avail this offer, you have to enter the code IAS English. On the subscription page, you might see a different price. So to avail the offer, you need to enter the code IAS English. The second important announcement is I'll be conducting a complete roundup of all the current affairs articles from the Press Information Bureau. Many students were writing mails asking me to cover PIB articles, especially the ones which are important for the upcoming prelims examination. Now, if you have seen previous year question papers, in the prelims exam, a number of questions are directly picked, line to line, verbatim. They're picked from PIB news articles. So this is often a very difficult area for students to cover, as every day the government comes out with several news releases. Different ministries and branches of the government, they all bring out a lot of press releases, which is very hard to cover on a regular basis. So on the 27th and 28th of February, that is today and tomorrow, from 8:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. in the night, in these 2-hour sessions, I will be covering all the important prelims related press releases from the period January 2025 to Jan 2026, a 12-month coverage of all the important current affairs from PIB. Now, where will these classes take place? These classes will be held on the Unacademy app and they are free for all of you. The link has been provided in the video description for both the sessions. So please click on it and enroll now. And please don't forget to join me tonight at 8:30 p.m. Now let's get started and look at the first topics that we are going to discuss. So in today's paper, we have an editorial and an article on India-Israel relationship. As a result of Prime Minister Modi's landmark visit to Israel and the key agreements that were signed yesterday, we have a couple of articles in today's newspaper focusing on India-Israel relationship. Then on page 17, we have an article related to the new GDP data that the government is going to release today. Now, these are two very, very important topics which require a much more detailed explanation of its own. So, I'll not cover these two articles in the Hindu analysis. Instead, we will bring out two separate videos today. Today, Sham sir will be making a separate video on the new GDP data, and I'll make a separate video on India-Israel relations, covering the entire spectrum of the relationship. So don't forget to catch these two small videos by today evening. Now let's look at the first topic that we're going to discuss. On page number 8, the Hindu carries a very insightful article on the POCSO and the unintended consequences that this law has been having on Indian society, particularly on the adolescents in India. So what is POCSO? POCSO stands for Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. It was enacted by the Parliament in 2012, and it mainly focuses on protecting minor children from any form of sexual abuse and exploitation. The law defines those who are under the age of 18 years as minors. And if any minor is sexually exploited, abused, or raped, then the one who has committed this offense faces very strict penal action under the stringent POCSO. So, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, it is designed to uphold the rights of the child for a healthy and safe upbringing, and it is intended to protect minors from any such predatory sexual intention or approaches of these accused. So now, what we are seeing is it has been more than a decade since this law has been implemented. We have seen several frivolous and even cases being filed which have a very wrong intention behind it, which is essentially designed to misuse the provisions. And this has led to the very derailment of the intention behind this law. In most cases, it has been noticed that POCSO related charges are being filed even in consensual sexual relationships involving minor children. Let's say two minors of age 15, 16, or 17, they are involved in a consensual romantic sexual relationship, an intimate relationship, and the families tend to oppose it, particularly if it is of intercaste nature or interfaith nature. Generally, the parents of the girl child end up filing charges of kidnapping and even POCSO related rape charges against the boy. And this has been the unintended consequence and the biggest miscarriage of the law itself. So this is the topic which is being explored in this detailed article today. So let's dive a little deep into this and explore the social angle and the legal constitutional angle with regard to the unintended consequences of POCSO. So as I was mentioning, the biggest unintended consequence is that where parents who oppose any sort of romantic relationship involving minors, this is where even consensual relationships are often being labeled as a form of statutory rape by invoking the stringent provisions of POCSO. And especially if the minor couple, right, if they belong to different castes, different communities. In India's Orthodox society, where parents have a controlling nature over their children, and this essentially ends up resulting in the complete misuse of the law itself. So there have been many such examples and incidents which are documented in this article as well. In fact, recently, just last month, in January 2026, the Supreme Court of India has taken note of this concern, and it has urged the government of India to consider introducing the so-called Romeo Juliet clause under the POCSO so that an exemption can be provided for such consensual intimate relationships involving minors, and they need not be harassed by the family and even by the police and the authorities, and particularly the boy who might be a minor as well need not face unnecessary rape charges for what was a consensual sexual relationship. Now this raises important questions of society and polity, as I mentioned. Now, when you look at the studies that have been carried out, several civil society groups, they have examined the misuse of POCSO. And according to this data, out of all the cases that are filed under POCSO, at least 24% cases involve the misuse of the law, where consenting minors are in a consensual relationship, and just because parents oppose it, they end up filing cases or bringing up charges of kidnapping and even rape, and it results in the filing of POCSO charges. So at least 24% of the cases being filed are of this nature. And 80% of these cases, they're often filed by the parents of the girl child, which again shows the patriarchal nature that is very evident here as well. So this ends up penalizing minor girls. It ends up penalizing the boy involved in a consensual relationship as well. And it creates a huge emotional and generational trauma. It even compromises the individual sexual autonomy, reproductive autonomy, and the individual rights of these minors. Now, see, before 2012, before POCSO, the age of minor was set at 16 years. 16 years was considered as the threshold under Indian law to be treated as a minor. But this changed in 2012 with the enactment of Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. It raised the age to 18 years. And this was maintained by the Criminal Amendment Law of 2013. The Criminal Amendment Law of 2013 retained this, and as a result, the age of considering a kid as a minor has been kept at 18 years. Now, this many experts consider to be quite arbitrary in nature, though the Supreme Court has said that a Romeo Juliet clause needs to be introduced to provide an exemption. And the Supreme Court has even referred to a term called close in age, meaning it has urged the government to consider a more appropriate age, maybe which could be going back to 16 years as the threshold for minors. But this, again, experts believe is very arbitrary. Because what if there is a case involving a girl who's 15 years old and a boy involved of age of 16 years? Let's say you provide an exemption through the so-called Romeo Juliet clause to exempt such consensual relationships. Even then, POCSO charges will get invoked if, let's say, the close-in age concept is involved. So this, again, is a very complex issue that needs to be further discussed and debated in the society. The government will have to ensure that there is wider consultation held on this issue to try and address this in the most appropriate manner. Because generally what happens is that in such consensual relationships, especially if the girl ends up getting pregnant, the girl has to deal with the entire burden, the emotional, the physiological, and the financial burden as well, where she might even get isolated from the family. There have been incidents where family even uses physical violence to try and discipline their children. And this, in a way, takes away the basic rights of choosing one's partner, of exercising one's autonomy over their body and their reproductive rights. Now, see, please understand that normative sexual behavior, exploring one's sexual identity, is very much part of the teenage years and adolescence. This is something which is widely accepted in any progressive society. But the law, though it doesn't have the intention, its unintended application is resulting in curbing those basic rights of adolescents, and it puts them through a very horrific process because it will end up ruining their academic careers, their entire future, and places a huge emotional trauma on both the boy and the girl. Even though they are in a consensual relationship, just because of opposition from the families, when they approach the police, right, they end up invoking charges of kidnapping and rape charges under POCSO, and that's where this entire trail begins. Now, under POCSO, the institutions, such as, let's say, hospitals, they have an obligation on them to report any such case to the law enforcement, to the police. Let's say a teenage girl who was in a consensual, intimate relationship with a teenage boy. And let's say they were physically involved and she gets pregnant. And of course, she can't inform her parents because she's scared. She's worried that she'll not get enough support. And let's say she approaches a gynecologist to get the pregnancy terminated. Because under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, until 24 weeks of pregnancy, termination of pregnancy is legally allowed. And in the entire healthcare sector, there is one sacrosanct principle, which is the confidentiality of the personal details of the patients, which the doctors and the healthcare system is supposed to protect. But because of the obligation of POCSO, the doctors, the hospitals, the clinics, they are obligated to inform any teenage pregnancy to the police. Now, you can't expect the doctors to figure out whether this was a consensual relationship or did it involve any rape or sexual exploitation. So, due to the compulsion of the law, the institutions that are involved, like hospitals and doctors, they end up reporting these cases which in turn exposes the girl child who's already facing a very traumatic experience to further face severe challenges. Not only the financial burden and the emotional trauma, but the entire cumbersome process and the legal challenges that the couple will face is something which erodes their basic rights, the right over their uh, bodies, the right to choose their partners. Of course, this needs to be tackled in a much more delicate manner, where right in the schooling system you focus on sex education, you promote better awareness about reproductive rights, promote safe sex practices starting from a very young age. But unfortunately, in conservative societies, usually these topics are seen as taboo, which are not openly discussed, right? Even schools hesitate to bring up such discussions, though we have seen big changes happen, but the practice still prevails. And even in the household, right, at the household level as well, family members and parents often hesitate to discuss these topics, which are considered as social taboos. So, due to the lack of sexual awareness, the lack of awareness about reproductive rights, and the lack of awareness of the legal landscape, so several minor couples get involved in this mess, and in a way, the law is enabling this, allowing this to happen. So that's why the intervention of the Supreme Court last month is of great significance. The Supreme Court has urged the government to consider this exception for consensual romantic relationships and ensure that they are not treated as part of statutory rape cases. But however, this requires a wider debate amongst policymakers, with civil society, because there is a very important need to ensure that children remain protected from sexual offenses, from any form of sexual exploitation, rape, etc. There should not be any dilution of the law in that regard. But at the same time, it should not result in these unintended consequences where innocent minor couples are being targeted and entire lives are being ruined in the process. So that is the focus of this entire article. The article is trying to shed light on this crisis of sorts that you see in the country, where many, many such cases keep coming up. So the only way forward here is for the government to initiate a wider debate. The Ministry of Women and Child Welfare should focus on a parliamentary discussion and involve other stakeholders, from clinical psychologists to the healthcare system uh, to the civil society, and bring them on board and work out a better system through which such cases can be exempted while ensuring that the strict provisions are not diluted. Because under POCSO, right, the accused faces very strict legal action. Even the doctors, for example, if they don't report these incidents, let's say if they don't report such cases of teenage pregnancy, then even the doctors face penal action with jail up to 6 months to 1 year. And it's primarily that fear which drives doctors to reveal confidential personal details of the patients, reporting the cases to the police, right? And you can't expect, as I said, doctors to determine whether this is a case of consensual relationship or a case of sexual exploitation. They're not in a position to verify that. And automatically, when FIRs are filed, the personal details tend to come out into the public domain, causing further uh, pressure and stress and abuse for the victims, particularly the girl involved, in case she gets pregnant, and becomes very traumatic legally and socially for the boy as well. So, this is the sensitive issue that the article is trying to bring out. So, there is a need to bring some changes in POCSO to ensure that these objectives are met. So, based on what we've discussed, please take up a practice question and let me know what's your view on this topic in the comment section below. Now, let's look at the next topic. On page 12, there's a detailed column focusing on the so called bulldozer justice, which has been quite frequently used in few states in India, in states like Uttar Pradesh, even in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. There have been such incidents where the local administration, that is the municipal bodies, the urban local bodies, they often end up demolishing the houses of the accused involved in certain crimes. So essentially, let's say there is a riot which has happened, and there are few elements. Maybe they are miscreants, they are criminal elements. Maybe they were involved in planning the riot, in instigating a law and order situation. So that's purely a criminal matter for the justice system to deal with. But for the government to take this upon itself and use other provisions of municipal governance to demolish the house of the accused, even before their guilt is proven in court, and deliver the punishment by destroying the house and uprooting entire families, this is a clear violation of rule of law, and it's a direct threat to the very principle of due process. This again strips away some essential rights that are guaranteed through the constitution, through the legal framework, and it basically upends the very criminal justice process itself. Now, see, when you look at any crime, it could be murder, it could be rape, it could be riots, right? It could even be an act of terrorism. In any incident of crime, first you have a complaint being filed, right? Once the accusation is made, once the allegation is brought up, it has to be thoroughly investigated by the law enforcement, by the police. Following investigation, once the evidence is built up, the charge sheet is filed, the case is taken up for adjudication, where the prosecution, often representing the state, will try to prove the guilt of the accused. So now it's up to the courts to determine whether the accused is innocent or guilty. And according to principles of natural justice, the accused is presumed to be innocent until the guilt is proven by the prosecution based on the evidence collected by the investigating authorities. So that responsibility of proving someone's guilt lies on the state. And this is the due process which has been laid out. And now the courts will adjudicate whether the accused is guilty or not. And if held guilty, then the courts alone can deliver the punishment as per the law. Now, this power to punish cannot be taken by the state for itself. The state can't exercise this discretion. The government cannot exercise this discretion to punish the citizens, to impose penal action on citizens on presumed guilt. Just because there is an allegation, just because there is an accusation, this can't be a basis for the government, for the state governments, for the local bodies to punish the accused by using other legal provisions which are available. Though the entire process can be legally justified, there is a clear colorable intent behind it. Now, see, municipal bodies, your urban local bodies, they of course have an obligation to focus on land use regulation and deal with any illegal structures or any buildings that are violating the local bylaws, right? And they have to clear any encroachments which are deemed as illegal as per the local building codes and standards. That is definitely the jurisdiction of the urban local bodies. But even over here, there is a certain due process which is in place. The urban local bodies, first, they issue a notice to the owner of such buildings who might be in violation of local building laws and bylaws. Then the owners are given a right to respond, right? There is some time period given as well after the notice is issued, and the owners can respond, trying to defend their position. After exhausting all the options, finally, if there is no other option available, only then demolition orders can be issued in public interest. But even here, without demolition, there are many cases across our country where such illegal structures and encroachments have been regularized. Many state governments introduce that process where they allow illegal structures to be regularized and later notified as legal structures. So demolition is seen as a last resort when no other option is seen as viable. In larger public interest, demolition orders are issued, and this is a time-taking process. And there's a certain due process put in place to protect the basic right of property. Right to property remains a constitutional right. It was a fundamental right previously, but after the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978, it has been moved out of fundamental rights, right, from Article 19 and 31, and remains a constitutional right. So no person can be deprived of property unless and until the state follows the procedure established by law. But we have seen many such cases where the accused, right, they might be accused of certain crimes, just on the basis of the allegation, just immediately after the FIR is filed, Urban local bodies, they show a sudden intention, a sudden urgency to issue notices and identify the buildings that are attached to the accused or owned by them or owned by their family members. And in a great sense of urgency, within days, within hours, they bring bulldozers and demolish these buildings. Now, quite often, this sort of justice is celebrated, especially on social media or by some blind party followers, right? They celebrate this as quick justice delivered by the state, by powerful leaders. But however, this is a miscarriage of justice. It's a direct violation of the constitutional norms. Though the demolition might be justified as legal, because there might be illegal buildings. Most buildings in the country would have violated some local bylaws or the other. Yes, there is a due process for that. But linking the municipal land regulation with criminal punishment and justifying this as legal is indeed colorable in its intent. So it is for the courts to adjudicate the guilt of the accused. It's for the state to prove the guilt of the accused. And you can't mix up the two and justify that the actions which are taken to demolish the houses are legal because the local regulations have been followed and illegal structures are just being demolished. Because see, there are many such illegal structures. You don't see such urgency from local bodies to demolish them. Now, let's say, do you see such action if a government minister is accused of a crime? Tomorrow, will local bodies go and demolish the house of a local MLA or a MP? You never see that happening, right? So this basically breeds a sense of impartiality into the administration itself, where few accused, right, particularly from few sections of the society might be targeted, and that basically depends on political discretion. So this is a clear violation of rule of law. The Supreme Court has been very clear in 2024. The Supreme Court has issued directions in this regard, and yet it continues to be blatantly violated by the urban local bodies based on instructions from the state government, because they will justify this as parallel action to just target illegal buildings. But when you look at the sense of urgency only to target some buildings owned by accused or by family members of the accused, right, you will realize the larger intent. So this again strips away the rights of the family members of the accused as well. Let's say there is a criminal who's committed a murder or involved in an act of terrorism. You can't go and punish their parents, their siblings, or their children who might get uprooted because of destruction of the house. Right? For example, you saw this in Jammu and Kashmir as well recently in the Delhi Red Fort blast case, where the father of the accused, their property was demolished even before the courts could adjudicate. Right? So there's no doubt criminals deserve their punishment, but that is for the courts to decide. The state can't exercise this political discretion and use the building bylaws and local municipal laws to demolish the buildings of the accused even before the courts have taken up the case. So this is clearly considered as a violation of rule of law and violation of due process. So please take up a practice question based on this important topic. The topic does remain controversial. Maybe UPSC may not venture into it or ask a direct question on it, but you might see a question on right to property and depriving someone's right to property by linking it with criminal cases, delivering this as a punishment through state action, through executive action, and bypassing the judiciary itself. Because see, this will end up undermining the separation of powers, the doctrine of separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary. It ends up undermining the whole judicial process and the criminal justice system. So in that regard, the topic is very relevant for polity and governance, right? So maybe UPSC will not directly venture into the topic of bulldozer justice, but through right to property and its overall implications for due process and rule of law, you can anticipate questions over here, even especially in the interview. Right? The panel might try to put you in difficult position by asking such complicated questions or controversial topics. Now let's look at another important article. On page number 10, there's an article related to Indian economy and even international relations. The article focuses on critical minerals and India's pursuit to achieve self-reliance when it comes to critical strategic minerals. See, I'm sure all of you are aware of the importance of critical strategic minerals today, from lithium to cobalt to copper to graphite to rare earths. These critical strategic minerals, they are of very great importance across industries, from defense to aerospace to clean renewable energy, right? From solar to wind to electric vehicles to battery technology. So across domains, across critical emerging technologies, even for the AI industry, all these critical strategic minerals are extremely crucial. So those countries which are self-reliant in supply chain of critical strategic minerals, they not only exercise a great degree of economic independence, this in a way boosts their national security and their strategic autonomy. So today, India faces this big challenge where China controls 90% of the supply chains of most critical and strategic minerals. In fact, India has a near 100% dependency on lithium imports, where we depend entirely on China controlled supply chains, right? And we have seen how countries like China can weaponize this advantage, turn the economic advantage into a geopolitical advantage. Just last year, we saw how China gained an advantageous position by weaponizing its control over rare earth magnets. It even brought down the United States to its knees. Though Trump was trying to target China with high tariffs, eventually China forced the US to step down and agree to a favorable arrangement and bring down the tariffs by controlling the supply of rare earths and banning the export of rare earth magnets to the US and some of its allies. So, this again has been a lesson for India. So, now let's see what India has been doing. What has been India's policy approach to secure the supply of critical minerals and strategic minerals? See, even as recently as 2023, most of the critical strategic minerals were not officially recognized in India as critical and strategic. They were largely classified under atomic minerals, which means this was entirely the monopoly of the public sector. Since the atomic sector was not deregularized and privatized, right now, even this sector has been opened up for private competition. But back then, before 2023, right, the atomic sector was completely reserved for the monopoly of the state-led institutions or state-owned entities. So it's only in the last couple of years that India has been making a big shift. Today, India has brought out a complete list of critical and strategic minerals. There are 30 such minerals which are officially notified by the government of India as critical and strategic minerals, which are crucial for the Indian economy and for India's national security. The government has launched the National Critical Mineral Mission with an outlay of 16,000 crores to secure these supplies. So, under the National Critical Mineral Mission, there is a three-step focus. One is to focus on domestic exploration and ensure we build up domestic mining and processing capabilities to fully harness the domestic resources which are present. Like recently, lithium blocks have been discovered in India, right? India does have significant copper deposits, some graphite deposits, uh, and few other rare earths as well. So exploring them, identifying these deposits, then mining them, making it financially viable and processing it to achieve the ultra level purity, high level purity, which is required by the industries. So this entire supply chain is something that India hopes to create to focus on the domestic resources which are present. Then apart from that, India is looking at external sourcing. Ensuring that the external supplies are resilient to geopolitical shocks. We have seen during COVID-19 how the lockdown in China crippled the supply chain of these critical minerals and rare earths and how it impacted industries across the world. Right? Manufacturing came to a standstill in several countries just because China went into a lockdown. So, what if China misuses this for a geopolitical advantage? So, securing your resilience and building up these alternate supply chains, which are not vulnerable geopolitically, which can't be controlled by external powers, is something which has been a priority for India. So, India has even set up a public institution called KABIL, Khanij Videsh India Limited, similar to ONGC Videsh Limited, like how OVL scouts for oil and gas supplies from abroad. Similarly, KABIL performs the same role, like how OVL secures energy security for India by scouting for resources abroad, oil and gas resources abroad. Similarly, Kabul is now mandated to scout for critical strategic minerals. It has even secured a lithium block in Argentina. So the focus is primarily on the lithium triangle in South America that includes Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. Then Kabul is also focusing on similar deals with Australia, which is also blessed with critical minerals. It's also focusing on African countries like Democratic Republic of Congo. So the goal is to secure these mines, which could be operated by Indian firms, maybe through joint ventures, where we not only explore and mine the resource, but we handle the entire processing, refining, and the supply chain, the whole supply chain, to secure self reliance for India. The third focus of the critical mineral mission is to recycle critical and strategic minerals. So, in electronic devices, appliances which are being disposed, right, after they reach the end of their life cycle, they do contain precious metals, rare earths, and critical strategic minerals. So, if it is scientifically collected and if the waste, the electronic waste is scientifically processed, you can recover and recycle these critical strategic minerals and bring them back into the production cycle. So, these are the priorities of the National Critical Mineral Mission. And India has been really driving the policy here. The government is providing a sovereign direction, right? A state led, government led direction to focus on self reliance in critical minerals. Now, for example, in the recent budget, the government of India has reduced the duties on certain goods to zero, which are required for mining and processing of critical minerals. As India seeks to build up its domestic capability to mine these resources and process them, the government is trying to incentivize the industry by removing the import duties and taxes on those goods which are required, the engineering components, machines, which might be required for Indian companies to mine and process these minerals. So, this is a big policy boost, a big incentive the government is providing to the industry. See, India already has capability to produce few high purity critical minerals. Now, if you take copper, for example, graphite, even rare earth oxides, then tin and titanium, these are some of the critical supplies that India already has some expertise in. We do produce high purity graphite, copper, titanium, etc., up to 99.9% purity, which is required in the industry. So now we have to scale these capabilities. But to scale the production, you also need to create sufficient demand, local demand in the domestic market, right? So there should be a thriving solar and wind energy industry, a thriving electric vehicle and battery industry, a thriving AI industry. Only then you will have sustained demand for critical strategic minerals. If you just focus on exploration, mining, and processing, then who will end up buying your critical strategic minerals eventually? Of course, you can export it, but that's not the whole purpose here. The purpose is to secure the domestic supplies. So, for that, you need to create domestic demand by parallelly supporting these emerging industries, critical emerging technologies, from clean renewable energy to artificial intelligence to electric vehicles. These industries will have to scale up very quickly so that sufficient demand can be created, which will automatically attract capital into mining and processing. The moment a big demand gets created locally, and if there is enough support for domestic mining and production, then you will see sufficient investments happening in the sector, sufficient interest from the private sector to scale up production domestically. So this is one challenge that India is trying to address. It's one big problem statement that India is trying to solve as of now. Then India is also looking at some new initiatives. In the recent budget, the government has proposed the establishment of rare earth corridors, particularly in the coastal states covering Kerala and Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. These two rare earth corridors have been proposed with a lot of incentives and policy support, which the state governments can utilize to focus on securing these essential supplies and scouting for the deposits. So, when it comes to domestic exploration, what can India do to identify these deposits and these blocks? Because our understanding of India's geology and resource distribution is very limited when it comes to critical strategic minerals. Very few blocks and deposits have been found. And again, we are years and decades away from even commercially exploiting those resources. Because setting up the whole supply chain is a very long time consuming process, right? China invested nearly 3 decades of effort and billions of dollars to achieve this dominance it has. And India is just starting out in this domain. So, what can we do with regard to exploration apart from creating domestic demand and giving the right policy support for domestic production? First, you need to focus on exploration, right? So, for domestic exploration, the writer is suggesting that we need to integrate India AI mission with the national geophysical policy, the national geospatial policy, where you make use of geospatial information for resource scouting, the national geospatial policy, and create integration with mission Anveshan and integrate the efforts with the national geospatial data repository. You need an integration of these four to promote domestic exploration. See, Mission Anveshan is primarily in the petrochemical hydrocarbon sector. It's an initiative run by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, where seismic data, geological data, geospatial data is being used to scout for oil deposits and gas deposits across the country, including in our exclusive economic zone. So, a mission like this is required for critical strategic minerals as well, where geological data, geospatial imagery generated through ISRO's satellites, which are now part of the National Geospatial Data Repository, and even seismic data, this has to be integrated with AI enabled exploration. Today in Mission Anveshan, this is what the Petroleum Ministry is doing. It's using AI based exploration by integrating seismic maps and geospatial data to scout for hydrocarbon resources across the country. A similar approach is required for critical strategic minerals, where these missions and initiatives of the government are integrated, databases are integrated, and with focus on using geospatial data, India should prioritize the exploration of domestic deposits. Then we also need to explore external collaborations, foreign collaborations, which India has been doing very actively, because domestic exploration and processing and mining will take many, many years and even few decades. So until then, we need to meet our demands through external supplies. So in the process, for the short to medium term, we need to reduce dependency on China and move towards trusted partners. Ensure we build alternate supply chains with trusted partners to secure our strategic autonomy. So India has been doing this already. For example, we have a critical mineral partnership with Australia, which is blessed with immense resources of critical and strategic minerals. Kabul has already started scouting for investments and it has secured a deal with Australia. We have similar arrangements with Japan. Recently, under the free trade agreement with European Union, India has created an arrangement to focus on critical minerals. We have such deals with France, with Germany. Then just yesterday, India has signed a critical mineral deal with Israel as well. Now, these are countries which already have critical minerals and resources present, and even mining and processing capabilities present with them. Then, in a few days, Canadian Prime Minister, uh, he would be visiting India, right? And India would be looking to secure a similar deal with Canada as well. So India is proactively exploring such bilateral partnerships with trusted partners to secure these supplies. We are entering important alliances and initiatives such as Pax Silica initiative that India has formally joined last week, which is a US-led initiative to secure the supplies of silicon, graphite, and other critical minerals required for semiconductor fabrication. India also joined the Mineral Security Partnership, which is also a US-led initiative. So such alliances and external partnerships with trusted allies and partners could help India secure these supplies to reduce dependency on China, to ensure that we don't face any geopolitical coercion and the supplies are not vulnerable to geopolitical shocks. So these are the different points that we can take away from this important article. Now, moving on, uh, there's another column on page 12 that focuses on the developments in Hong Kong and how China is crushing any democratic spirit which is left in Hong Kong and forcing its full integration into China. So, the topic will help you understand what's happening in Hong Kong and what's the crisis that you see there, and how China is trying to crush any remaining democratic spirit in this special autonomous territory. So, to understand this topic, we need to slightly go back in history and understand what's the past of Hong Kong and what is its present status. See, Hong Kong remained a British colony even after decolonization swept the world in 1940s, 50s, and 60s. For many more decades, Britain continued to colonize Hong Kong, and it left Hong Kong only in 1997. Whereas mainland China had already come under communist rule. The People's Republic of China had come up in 1949, establishing its sovereign rule over mainland China. So places like Hong Kong and even Macau remained outside of Chinese control, remained outside of Chinese communist control. So when the British left Hong Kong eventually, they struck a deal with China, the Sino British Agreement, that led to a basic law being adopted in 1997. So Britain exiting Hong Kong and Macau was based on one condition. The condition was that China, which is PRC, the communist state, would respect and follow the basic law that provides a degree of autonomy to Hong Kong and Macau. So this created a very unique system, which is often referred to as one country, two systems. Now, what do you mean by this? It means that China's sovereignty over Hong Kong was finally recognized. That China has complete sovereignty, territorial sovereignty over Hong Kong. But however, when it comes to the political and economic system, it will remain different from mainland China. Now, if you look at mainland China, which is governed by the Communist Party, the Communist Party of China, or the Chinese Communist Party, right? The state which is known as the PRC, the People's Republic of China. What is its political and economic system? It's essentially a communist authoritarian state with no fundamental rights, with no basic rights, with no free speech, with no free press, right? China largely remains a controlled economy, though it has embraced a certain version of capitalism, right, which has been customized to the Chinese context. But still, it remains a closed and controlled economy, completely ruled and controlled by the communist state, by the Communist Party. And the general secretary of the Communist Party remains a sort of a supreme leader in the country. So, especially after Xi Jinping came to power in 2013, when he became the general secretary of the Communist Party of China, right, he has been trying to consolidate his authority, and he has clearly displayed an expansionist, aggressive vision for China. So, since then, China has been trying to erase the basic law that provided for one country, two system model. So, though China remained, that is, mainland China remained communist and authoritarian, specifically for Hong Kong, there was an exception as a special administrative region of China, where China will only have territorial sovereignty, but politically and economically, Hong Kong would remain democratic and its economy would be capitalist. It's on this condition that Britain left Hong Kong and essentially accepted the sovereignty of mainland China. So while China controls the foreign policy, defense, and other aspects of Hong Kong, the political system, the democratic system which was enshrined by the British, the capitalist economic model which was built up primarily by Britain and its Western allies, that could not be touched by China according to the basic law of 1997. Now, this basic law was largely followed until 2013, until Xi Jinping came to power. But after Xi Jinping assumed total control over the Communist Party, From 2014 onwards, there has been a targeted attempt to destroy the political and economic system of Hong Kong. China has been making calculated moves to end the democratic and the capitalist system that exists in Hong Kong. So in 2014, for example, China introduced a very controversial law that is for elections in Hong Kong, the candidates who can stand for these democratic elections, they would be vetted by the Communist Party. Now, if Communist Party is vetting the candidates, then that's no longer a democratic exercise, right? That takes away the free will to contest elections. So in 2014, when China proposed this law, there was large-scale protests that was witnessed in Hong Kong, the pro-democracy protests, also known as the Umbrella Revolution or the Umbrella Protests of 2014. The people of Hong Kong who have cherished their free rights as compared to the citizens of China in mainland China, right? They came out on the streets, particularly with yellow umbrellas, holding sit-ins and protests against this proposed law where Communist Party would have to approve the candidates who can contest elections in Hong Kong. So this was to exercise the control of the Communist Party on the affairs of Hong Kong. And that led to the Umbrella Revolution or the Umbrella Protests. Of course, China crushed the protests eventually. And since then, China has accelerated its attempts to gain full control over Hong Kong and to end its political and economic autonomy. In 2019, China proposed a controversial extradition law under which the people of Hong Kong, the residents, they could be extradited to China. They could be extradited to China if they face criminal charges. So on charges of criminal conspiracy, which could pose a threat to China's security or so-called acts of terrorism as per China's definition, right? China could define even an act of protest as an act of terrorism, right? And any act of dissent, any act of opposition against the communist rule, against authoritarian rule, against the communist leadership could be treated as sedition and secessionist activity. So on these charges, China proposed this law that Hong Kong residents could be extradited to China, to mainland China, to face punishment for criminal charges. So China was trying to creep into the law and order system as well and enforce its authoritarian rule through the extradition law. So this again saw strong opposition from the pro-democracy movement, and people of Hong Kong protested, resulting in large-scale protests in 2019 as well. But now China has consolidated its authority through another law, which was passed by China, the National Security Law, that was brought out in 2020. So under the National Security Law, now China has extended full control over law and order into Hong Kong. So those who stand accused of certain crimes, certain conspiracies, right, they will be tried under Chinese law and they can be extradited to China. Chinese intelligence and law enforcement can maintain surveillance in Hong Kong. They can even arrest and detain Hong Kong residents. Such extraordinary powers have now been given to the communist state, to itself. And this has allowed Xi Jinping's regime to crush the political autonomy and economic independence of Hong Kong. In the last 5 years, we have seen how book publishers have been targeted. The major book publication houses, even few authors and publishers, they've all been targeted, arrested, and jailed because they were publishing and selling books that are banned by the Communist Party. Right? This is purely on ideological grounds. So any books by Western authors, books focusing on free speech, on presenting a different worldview, which the Communist Party doesn't agree with, all such books have been banned and the publishers and authors have been arrested and jailed as well. Then some of the well-known media outlets, including popular newspapers and journals, they have been targeted. Well-known editors, journalists, they have all been arrested and jailed and extradited as well to China. And the freedom of press has been completely crushed in Hong Kong in the last 5 years. So the article is essentially telling you that under Xi Jinping, China, which has become more authoritarian, which has become more aggressive, expansionist, it has completed its total control of Hong Kong through the national security law. Despite previous protests in 2014 and 2019, China has crushed the protests, it has crushed the pro democracy movement, and you're seeing the full integration of Hong Kong into mainland China, right? So, this has implications for democracy, and it remains a major point of friction between China and Western countries. In fact, US and United Kingdom, right? They even criticize China for violating human rights and democratic principles. And they even have a set of sanctions on China for some of its violations in Hong Kong and in other frontier regions like Tibet and Xinjiang. China is accused of such aggression, even in Tibet and as well as in Xinjiang. So, Western countries led by US and Britain, they have even placed few sanctions on China, which becomes a point of friction between these major powers. So now let's come to the prelim section and look at two important topics. So on page 14, there's an article which can be relevant for society and especially for students who have sociology as their optional subject. India has lost one of the leading intellectual figures in the world of sociology. T.K.Oommen, a very, very well known sociologist, researcher, policy maker, and as well as a professor at the School of Social Systems in JNU, has passed away. So the Hindu pays tribute to this towering intellectual figure. Right? Any student of sociology would have heard about him, read his work. His contribution to the field of sociology, to Indian society, to Indian governance is immense. It's immeasurable. He's a Padma Bhushan awardee. The government has recognized his contribution, his efforts through the Padma Bhushan. And his most important work was the sociological analysis of the Bhudan movement. In post-independence history, you might have studied about Bhudan movement led by Vinoba Bhave, right, in 1951, to convince landlords in a feudal society to voluntarily give up a part of the land to the landless farmers and peasants. Now, this was a revolutionary movement, a bloodless revolution, a peaceful, silent revolution, where Vinoba Bhave and the volunteers under him, the disciples under him, would convince landlords to part with their land to provide for land distribution and land reforms. So, this was studied from a sociological perspective, and a very in depth analysis was brought out by T.K.Oommen. And this was one of his standout works in the field of sociology. Later, he went on to contribute immensely. Uh, for example, he studied the role of the nursing professionals, the challenges that they face, how they contribute to the society. He went on to become a member of the Sachar committee that was set up by the then UPA government to focus on the socio-economic status of Muslim minorities in the country. He was one of the key contributors as a panel member in the Sachar committee. Then he even became the chairman of the Indian Sociological Society and went on to become the president of the International Sociological Association. So he's a world renowned figure for his contribution in the field of sociology. He has even studied the complex communal environment in the country and how India's communal divide contributes to social and political changes. Right? This has again been a key contribution. He even headed the Gujarat Harmony Committee, which was set up after communal violence in the state of Gujarat. So he played a role in building bridges between different communities which had been polarized and divided. So he believes that, or he used to believe that sociology is a very complex domain, which is a mixture of society, culture, history, politics that defines sociological interactions. So this theory that he brought out and the studies he carried out, the research work he brought out, is something which is widely revered in the field of sociology even today, right? And it remains a key reading material for any student of sociology. So this could be relevant for society and sociology. Now, coming to the last topic, let's talk about RoDTEP, the remission of duties and taxes for export products. So this is an initiative that the government introduced in 2021 to remit the duties and taxes that are collected on products that are meant for exports, to give a boost for exports. See, export oriented industries, they end up paying a lot of duties and taxes, right? So they can claim a refund on certain exports based on certain criterias under the RoDTEP scheme. It was brought out by the government to reduce the tax burden on exporters, give them a push and incentive to boost Indian exports. So recently, the government has revised the rates for textile exporters. So this is taking a hit on the textile industry. So the industry association is urging the government to review this and bring back the previous rates with regard to the RoDTEP scheme. Because see, when you look at textile exports from India, India is a leading exporter of textiles. Cotton exports account for nearly $11 billion, which is nearly 30% of our total textile and garment exports. So the reduction of the refunds and the rates will directly hurt Indian exporters, that too in a difficult global environment. Like for example, US was one of the key markets, and thanks to Trump's tariff policies, the textile garment industry and cotton industry has taken a huge hit in India. So further downward reduction of these refund rates will affect Indian textile industries, which are export oriented industries. That's why the industry is urging the government to review this policy and bring back the old rates so that they can claim more refunds on the duties and taxes they've already paid. And this could become an incentive for them to focus on more exports. So on this note, I bring my analysis to an end. I hope the session was useful and interesting. And if you benefited, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.